as the question of why the halacha is that Korban Pesach and in this day and age, afikomen should be eaten besova, meaning when one is satiated already, and matzah has the requirement of being eaten betaavon, when one is hungry. The Torah in the pasuk with regard to Korban Pesach says the following: Dabru el kol adat Yisrael lemor, tell all of Klal Yisrael, remember they're still in Egypt, Ba'asor lachodesh hadzeh, on the 10th day of the month of Nisan. This is the first mitzvah after God has given us the mitzvah of being Mekadesh Chodashim. On the 10th of the month, v'yikhu lahem ish sela vesav ot sela bayit. Each family should take a sheep, and for it's his family. V'im yibat habayit miyos miseh. And if there aren't a sufficient number of people who could consume a sheep, then combine with your neighbors or whatever, everybody should participate so that the sheep will be finished after the korban. From this we derive that the requirement that the Korban Pesach should be eaten in groups to facilitate the ability to completely consume the Korban Pesach so that nothing is left over. As a result, the groups who got together to eat the Korban Pesach were often quite large. This halacha stayed even when Klal Yisrael got to Eretz Yisrael and brought a Korban Pesach. So the groups were often quite large, and thus the amount of the korban eaten by each member of the group was often quite small. In addition, given the requirement of the halacha that the Pesach be eaten al hasova, when one was full, basically on a full stomach, which could not be fulfilled by the small amounts of the korban often available to the members of the Chabura or the group, required Chazal to come up with the idea of what's called Chagigat Abasa, a special korban chagiga, which was often also on the 14th, and which was consumed on the 14th before the Korban Pesach, so that the latter could be eaten al hasova, so that the Korban Pesach could be eaten when one was satiated. There's some, at the very end of Pesachim, there's a question in the last Mishnah, for those who've learning Daf Yomi and finished it on Monday, if I have to eat 2 korbanot, do I make one bracha? Do I make 2 brachot? Do I make a separate bracha al hazevach, which would be the korban chagiga? And do I make another bracha on the korban pesach? But in any event, not this year, but in a general year, if the Beis HaMikdash would be, there would be a korban abasa, chagigat abasa, which would be consumed by the chaburot, and then the korban pesach. Although we all recognize that Pesach is a yontav of contrast, avdut lecherut, from slavery to freedom, miyagon lesimcha, from despondency to joy, there is one contrast which prima facie, at least to me, makes no sense. And that is that the matzah that we eat must be eaten l'teavon, when we're famished, when a person is hungry and consumes the matzah with gusto, and the korban pesach, which is the symbol of Klal Yisrael's freedom, be eaten ala sova, in a state of satiety. At our Seder, the korban pesach is symbolized by the afikomen at the end of the meal, and it also must be eaten al hasova, which generally is not difficult given the fact that it comes after Shulchan Aruch. After we eat a full meal, we sit down, and the last thing that we eat is the afikomen, which is a stand-in for the korban pesach. If what we commemorate is slavery to freedom, then why should we be required to hunger for the bread of affliction, matzah, which is representative of our slavery, and downplay, at least gastronomically, achilat korban pesach, whose sacrifice was so pregnant with meaning for the gula. Slaughtering a sheep, the very symbol of idolatrous worship of the Egyptians, and eating its meat, which was otherwise not available to slaves, would seem to be an expression of freedom, which should be played up and not limited. Although Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar seemed to try to claim that they had meat readily available to them, or at least that's what the pasuk seems to say, I suggest to you, if the pasuk is properly understood, one realizes that it is not so, nor is it the claim of Klal Yisrael. I'm just going to digress for a minute, because I have always found this to be an absolutely fascinating shot. There was a Rav who lived in the late 1500s rather, and the 1600s, whose name was Rav Eliezer Ashkenazi. In today's terminology, he was a cross-cultural personality. He apparently was Ashkenazic, as his name would appear. He apparently learned in Salonika, found his way, and was a Rav in Fostat, which is Old Cairo, then moved to Cyprus, and then to Italy, and then he went to Prague, and then he died in Krakow, I believe. But in any event, he says the following about the following pasuk: "Vayilonu kol adat b'nei Yisrael Moshe." All the whole community of Klal Yisrael complained to Moshe, the Al Aaron b'midbar, and to Aaron as well. Vayomru aleihim, and they said, "Mi yitain mutenu biyad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim." It would have been better for us to have died in Egypt, b'shivteinu al sir habasar, when we were sitting next to the flesh pots of Egypt, b'achlenu lechem lasofa, and we had all the bread we needed. Ki otseisam osanu el hamidbar hazeh lahamit kol hakahal hazeh barav. Rather than taking us out into this desert and we're all going to die of starvation. Most people understand that pasuk to mean that they were claiming, which is a bit over the top, that they had all the meat that they wanted to eat. Says Rav Eliezer Ashkenazi in his shot on this pasuk, "Ledati hayu mitavim machal echad." They really were hungry for one food type. Sha'ad hayom osimo topa Mitzrayim. He says, I was there. They still make this food in Egypt. V'hu sha'osim bekemach umayim kemo pirurim v'nikra kushkashu. They take water and flour and they make it into little balls. Umoshivim oto asir habasar, and they put them on top of the pot with has some meat. Ubispashalim min ha'ed ho'alem min habasar, and the bread is cooked from the fumes, from the heat of the pot that has some meat in it. Ve'ein hapirurim ha'hem nogim babasar, but you shouldn't think the crumbs touch the meat. Rak shurim toch matlis onusunim toch kli nakuv. Either they're tied in some sort of cloth over the top of the pot, or they're in some sort of colander kind of pot. That is placed on top of the pot that has boiling meat in it. Why did they say, how did they describe it? We were sitting next to the flesh pot, but we were eating all the bread we could. Why? Ki otoa machal enu lalafe bo et apat, ki hu pat bat smoke. Lalafe bo apat is a halachic term that says, when I eat something that goes with bread, meat often goes with bread, fish often goes with bread. But that's not what they said. They didn't say we ate the machal. They said we ate the bread. What bread did they eat? They ate the bread that had absorbed the fumes of the meat, not that they ate the meat. So if that's the case, they don't even have a memory of eating meat. So why do we not feast on the Korban Pesach? The pasuk, I suggest to you, reinforces the notion that the Korban Pesach should have been the main element of the Seder meal, and not just a relatively small part of the meal. By this, I'm talking about in terms of consumption. I'm not talking about what it means, etc. The Torah took practical steps to ensure that the Korban Pesach was eaten al hasova. You should eat it when you were satiated. Instructed Klal Yisrael to eat in groups, as we saw in the Pasuk, to ensure that it was consumed. It limited its consumption to one night, the 15th, and only up to midnight. Directed that any leftovers be burned, so that in effect there was an incentive that it be totally consumed on the night of the 15th. In addition, the custom of Chagigat Arba Asa was instituted so that those sitting around the table would have other meat to fill up on Seder night. Interestingly, the basis for both requirements of Achilat Korban Pesach al Hasova and to eat Matzah Betaavon are both found in the Talmud Yerushalmi. With regard to eating the Korban Pesach, the Yerushalmi in the 6th parak of Pesachim states, Tani, we learn, Chagiga haba im ha Pesach, Chagigat Abasa, the separate korban that we offer, that you eat before the korban, first you ate the Chagigat Abasa, Kedei sheyochal ha Pesach lasova, so that you eat the Korban Pesach when you're already full. Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Book b'shem Rabbi Yaakov Badasai shelo yavo lidei shvirat etzem. Why should you eat the Korban Pesach al hasova? So you shouldn't come to break the bones, right? There's a pasuk that says you're not allowed to break the bones of the Korban Pesach. The Korban Eidah, in explaining the Gemara, says shemitoch shehu ra'ev, because he's hungry, he's hungry for the meat that's on the bones. Yishmar etzem me'atzamot Pesach, he's liable to come to break a bone. Uchsiv etzem lo sishburu bo. The pasuk says, bevayit echad yeachel, they should eat, each chabura should eat it in one house. Lo sitzi mimena min habayit min habasa chutza, they should not take any of the meat out from that house. The etzem lo tishburu bo, nor should they break any of the bones of the Korban Pesach. According to this explanation, the reason for eating Korban Pesach al hasova is very practical, so that one should not be so hungry that in effect he will tear the Korban Pesach apart in his hunger to eat the Korban, thereby leading him to break a bone which is an Isa Doraisa. While I don't question that the halacha of Shvirat Etzem is applicable to the requirement to eat the Pesach al hasova, I am not sure that it is the only reason or the hashkafic sort of philosophical reason for the requirement. As to the requirement to eat matzah, the Mishnah at the beginning of Arvei Pesachim states, Arvei Pesachim, Erev Pesach, Samuch lemincha, when it gets to be mincha time, lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. First, you shouldn't eat anything from the time of mincha. Generally here, we understand it to be the 10th hour of a sha'ah yomit, 10th hour of a sha'ah zmanit. Sometime, probably this year, I think I looked, it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you should stop eating. Why? Rashi says there, Kadeshi yochal matzah shel mitzvah, so that when it gets time to eat the matzah shel mitzvah, l'teovon mishum hidur mitzvah. You should eat it hungrily, because that's the best way to perform the mitzvah. The Gemara on later has various questions about what the Gemara is talking about, given the fact that it was understood that the matzot that one ate at the Seder were also all Erev Pesach. So why is the Gemara only discussing from Mincha on? The Yerushalmi sets forth the Iser in a very colorful and, if I could say, racy way when it says the following. Omer Rabbi Levi, Ochel matzah b'erev Pesach, if somebody eats matzah on Erev Pesach, kiba ala rusaso b'veis chamiv. It's as if he has relations with his intended bride in the house of his in-laws before the wedding. And somebody who does that is eligible to get malchus. The Korban Eidah explains the Rishalmi, Shekorov Yom Moed HaNesuin, it's leading up to the wedding night, and the groom has not controlled himself to wait until after he's married. Kach ze lo kovash liyitro lahamtin b'achilas matzah ad ha'erev. So too, somebody who eats matzah on Erev Pesach has not restrained himself from eating matzah until the time to eat matzah. I suggest to you that the example given by Rav Levi is a measure of the gusto which he felt the matzah had to be eaten. One must have a physical urge to eat matzah. The notion, therefore, is that one is required to control his desire and impulse to eat matzah, so that when he's actually required to do so, he eats it with full gusto. The Rabbeinu Tam has a different explanation. If we allow a person to eat matzah Erev Pesach, he will eat so much as to be considered an achila gasa, overeating, excessive consumption, which is defined as eating to such an excess that any further eating is considered revolting. And thus, when the Seder comes around, he will have no appetite for matzah. Consequently, even if he eats matzah, he will not be considered to have fulfilled the mitzvah rather. Parenthetically, it should be noted that the Rabbeinu Tam rules that if one eats on Yom Kippur after having eaten an achila gasa, he is not considered to have eaten. In other words, let's say leading up to the fast, I ate so much, right, that I can't think of eating anything else. And then Yom Kippur comes and I eat more. He's not considered to have eaten because after an achila gasa, ingesting food is not considered eating. If what the Rabbeinu Tam says is correct, why is eating the Korban Pesach al Hasova considered eating? So the Rabbeinu Tam is aware of the question, and he makes the following distinction. The Omer Rabbeinu Tam, the Trey Gavna Achila Gasa. What you have to understand is that there are two types of Achila Gasa, of overconsumption. Achatz, one is Shenafsho Kotza Melechol Va'oto Pota B'Yom HaKir. I simply can't eat anymore. I'm disgusted by the thought of eating. And in that kind of achila gasa, I'm potter if I continue to eat on Yom Kippur. V'yesh achila gasa, she'enu mis'ave lecho, is another type. I filled myself up. I have no desire to eat further. Avo yesh tam, but if I taste something, it's tasty to me. V'hod de Pesach necha al hasova, hainu she'mis'ave lecho tzas, says the Rabbeinu Tam. As long as he has a little appetite for the Korban Pesach, when he's al hasova, that's sufficient to be yotzei the mitzvah. The Rambam in Hilchos Chometz and Matzah, also chachamim le'achol matzah be'erev Pesach. It's also to eat matzah on erev Pesach. Kedei sheyeh heker le'achilaso be'erev. So he knows what he's eating, and he's desirous of the food on the night of Pesach. Umisha ochel matzah be'erev Pesach. If you eat matzah on erev Pesach, says the Rambam, makin oso makas mardus. He should get malchus. Ad sheteitze nafsho. I mean, you can give him so many makos that it could cost him his life. V'chein asur le'achol erev haPesach mikodem hamincha. Nor should you eat anything from before mincha. So you have this overwhelming desire to consume matzah. What can you eat? Mat peros, a little bit of fruit, or yorokos, or vegetables. Velo yemale kreso mehem, but he should not fill himself up. The chachamim harishonim, the original chacham, says the Rambam, even atzman erev Pesach, they would starve themselves erev Pesach to kedei le'achol matzah betava, so that they really lusted to eat the matzah. V'yu mitzvos chavivos olav, and that way they appreciated the mitzvah even more. The Ran Paskin, similar to the Rabbeinu Tam, Kaloma lo yaschil le'achol, he shouldn't start eating. Umefarish b'gemara dahainu tama ki hachad delay leise lemechel matzah achila gasa. We won't allow him to eat too much matzah. Kaloma shelo yuchal levloa osa ela bekoshi. Achila gasa means he won't be able to eat the matzah unless he has trouble swallowing. If that's the state that he's up to because he stuffed himself erev Pesach, says the Ran, then he's not yotzei the mitzvah of matzah. The lo mikre achila. That's not considered eating. Lo yochel ad Yosef kederech ben chorin. And also with regard to matzah, and I'll discuss this a little later, you should not eat the matzah until you do heseba, until you lean to your left. In the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber Paskins, also lechol pat mishah asiris v'lamala. You can't eat anything from the 10th hour of Shah's Manios and on. Kedei sheyochal matzah l'teavon, so that you consume the matzah. You really have a desire to consume the matzah. The Ramah, interestingly, expands the list of items which should not be consumed on Erev Pesach as follows. Avo matzah sheyotzim ba balayla, the matzah that you eat that night, on Seder night, asurim lechol kol hayom, abasa. You cannot eat matzah on the 14th. V'yesh nohagim, and there are minhagim, shelo lechol chazeret b'erev Pesach, you shouldn't eat moro erev Pesach. Kedei lechol moro l'teavon, you should want to eat the moro hungrily. V'chein biyom, and this applies to people in Chutz La'aretz. The Ramah says, "V'chein biyom rishon shel Pesach," on the first day of Pesach, because they have a second day, a second Seder to look forward to. Kedei Pesach, kedei lechol b'leil sheni l'teavon, so that you have a proper appetite for matzah on the second night. You shouldn't eat too much matzah on the first day. V'chein noagim, says the Ramah. You shouldn't eat too much on the first day, so that you eat matzah l'teavon on the second night. The notion that matzah should not be eaten before Pesach has been expanded over the years. The Mishnah Brewer quotes the minhag of not eating matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and there are people who refrain from eating matzah for a full month before Pesach, so that they are sure to eat matzah b'teavon from Purim to Pesach. The latter minhag may stem from the notion that shloshim yom kodem l'chag dorshim b'hilchot hachag, and we start to think about Pesach 30 days in advance. Yes, yet with regard to the Korban Pesach, the requirement is to eat it al hasova. In fact, according to certain Rishonim, principally the Rashbam, the Ikar mitzvah of achilas matzah is not the mitzvah when we make the bracha al achilas matzah before Shulchan Aruch, but rather at the time we eat the afikomen. Whether it is zecher lekorban Pesach or achilas matzah, the timing of its consumption ensures that it will be eaten al hasofa. I previously mentioned the Yerushalmi, who attributes the requirement to eat korban Pesach afikomen al hasofa to the fear that it is not, if it is not eaten this way, we possibly would come to rip the korban apart and break one of its bones, shvirat etzem. Both the Rambam and the Mechaber cite this as the reason for the requirement to eat korban Pesach, and today the afikomen al hasova. Says the Rambam in Hilchot Korban Pesach, mitzvah min hamuchar, it is a special mitzvah, le'achol b'sar ha-pesach achilas sova, to eat the Korban Pesach when you are satiated. Leficha im hikriv shalmei chagiga, if you bring the Korban chagiga abasa, ochel mehem tchila, eat that first. V'achar kach ochel b'sar Pesach, in other words, after you filled yourself up, then eat the Korban Pesach, kedei l'savo mimenu, so that you've eaten when you're almost satiated, and this is like the finishing touch. Says the Mechaber, la'achar gemar kol ha'seuda, ochlim mimatzah, this has to do with the afikomen. After we finish eating Shulchan Aruch, ochlim matzah hashmua tachas hamapa, we eat the afikomen. Kazayis kol echot, everybody should eat a kazayis. Zeicher lepesach hanechal ha'sova, to recall the Korban Pesach, which required us to eat it when we were full. V'yochlenu beheseba, and you have to eat it leaning. V'lo yivorech alav, and you don't make a separate bracha on it. V'yezohi lechol kodem chatzot, but like the Korban Pesach, you should be careful to eat it before halachic midnight, which I think this year is 11:47. Okay. we've basically now recited all of the sources and halachot, but I still feel that we have not developed the framework as to why they are so. Why is matzah eaten b'Betaavon and Korban Pesach ala sova? The overriding principle and mitzvah of this related to the Seder is articulated in the Haggadah as follows: Chayiv kol Adam liros atzmo ki ilu hu yotza min Mitzrayim. Our obligation on the night of the Seder is to view ourselves as if we are leaving Egypt. The Rambam changes or alters this a bit. Chayiv kol Adam laharos es atzmo ki ilu hu yotza min Mitzrayim. He has to show in some positive manner or in some manner as if he's leaving Egypt. Many Sephardim have the minhag that they get up and they do something. They put something on their shoulder and they walk around the table. I remember I had a nephew when he was little. His Rabbi told him you should do this. So we all had to take a piece of matzah and put it over our shoulder and walk around the table. The Egyptians still have, not the Egyptians, the Sephardim have that minhag, because the Rabbi Paskins, Chayiv Adam laharos es atzmo. He's got to do something demonstrative to show as if he's leaving Mitzrayim. I don't want to be misunderstood about what I am about to say, but we often get hung up in the minutiae of the mitzvot, associated with the evening. How much wine should we drink? How much karpa should we eat? What is the size of the kasayit matzah? Is it one kazayit or is it two? What time is chatzot, etc.? I don't want to contest the importance of performing the night's mitzvahs correctly and precisely, but it has to fit into a framework. We have to remember why we're doing all of this. It's not just enough to do it. We have to understand why we're doing it, and we have to keep focused on the message of the night, which is Chayiv kol Adam liros es atzmo ki ilu hu yotza min Mitzrayim. It has to be for me as I sit around the Seder table as if I'm leaving. What are we to see in Yetziat Mitzrayim? How are we to identify? The first thing is that we have to pay attention to the Torah's rendition of what happened. Vayomar Hashem el Moshe v'Aaron be'eretz Mitzrayim le'mor. Ribbono Shel Olam said to Moshe and Aaron, HaChodesh hazeh lachem rosh chodashim. This is the first month. Rishon hu l'chodshei hashana. Dabru al koadat Yisrael le'mor. Speak to Klal Yisrael and tell them, Be'asor lachodesh hazeh v'yichu lahem ish selaveis avot selabayit. Each household is to take a sheep. V'yimevat habayit, which we said before, if you don't have enough people, combine. Set tamim zachar. It's got to be an unblemished set. You have to watch that Korban Pesach until the 14th day. And in the afternoon of the 14th, you shech the Korban Pesach. And you take from the dam. And you sprinkle it on the two doorposts and on the lintel, where you're eating. Eat it. Tzli eish, roasted, umatzot, with matzah, amarorim yachlu, together with bitter herbs, you are to eat it. Al tochlu mimenu no vashel mevushal b'mayim. Don't eat it raw, and don't eat it cooked. Ki im tzli eish al rosho akroha, only roasted. Velo totiru mimenu ad boker. Don't leave any over. V'ano tam mimenu ad haboker v'eish tisrofu. What you leave over, you have to burn. V'chocha tochlu oto. How do I eat the Korban Pesach? How were the Jews in Mitzrayim told to eat the Korban Pesach? Matnechem chagurim, with their belts on. Nalechem baraglechem, with their shoes on. Umakelchem, with their staffs in their hands. V'achaltem oto b'chichvazon Pesach hu l'Hashem. And eat it quickly, right? As if you're leaving quickly. Varvati be'eretz Mitzrayim, and I will pass through Eretz Mitzrayim. V'iketi kol bechor be'eretz Mitzrayim adam v'abehema, and I will kill every firstborn, man and animal. Uv'chol alehei Mitzrayim aseh shvatim ani Hashem. V'haya hadam lachem la'ot halabatim, the blood that you have sprinkled on the doorposts and on the lintels will be the sign. V'riti et hadam uvasachti aleichem. I'll skip over those houses. V'lo yehem b'negev la'ashchith b'hakoti be'eretz Mitzrayim. And you will not be hit when I pass over. What do we learn from the Parsha? Klal Yisrael had to be ready to go. They had just slaughtered the Egyptian guard on the afternoon of the 14th. They were told to eat with their belts on their waists, shoes on their feet, their staffs in their hands, and they were to eat it in haste. They had to be ready to make a quick getaway. What they ate had to be able to be prepared quickly and consumed quickly. They took a bite of the Korban Pesach with Morah and Matzah and had to be prepared to leave. To ensure that we eat the same amount of Korban Pesach that the Jews ate in Mitzrayim, we don't sit down and make a major meal out of the Korban Pesach, or today out of the Afikomen, which they did not. We eat it al hasova to ensure that we are ready to go. We eat it when we are satiated. We eat the same amount they did so that we feel the same thing that they did. They did not make a fetish out of the meal, nor should we. Of course, we can't feel exactly what they did, but physically, at least, we can imitate the experience. But why is matzah different? Pay attention to which matzah we are reenacting on Seder night. We are not eating the matzah which was consumed with the Korban Pesach, al matzot umrorim yochlu. That's not the matzah we're eating. The Baal HaGadol tells us that we are consuming the matzah which they took with them. Matzah zu she'anu ochlim al shumah. This matzah, why are we eating it? Al shum shelo hispik b'tzeikom she'avosenu lahachmitz. The bread could not rise. Ad shenigla aleim melech machei amlochim. In the middle of the fermenting process of the bread, the Ribbono Shalom appeared. V'golom, and he redeemed them. Shenema vayofu es habotzei kasher hotziu mitzrayim ugot matzot kilo chametz. Why? They baked the bread, which they took out of Mitzrayim, matzot kilo chametz, because it didn't have time to rise. Why? Ki gorshu mitzrayim v'lo yochlu lehitmameya v'gam tzeidah lo asu lehem. They had no time to delay. They were thrown out of Egypt, and the Egyptians didn't make any food for them. In eating matzah, what are we to feel and visualize? What happened in Yetziat Mitzrayim? The Jews left not at a leisurely pace, but b'chipazon, quickly. They are forced to pack up their dough before it rises, and they leave Mitzrayim after hundreds of years. How do they eat? Voraciously, quickly, an eating which is almost primal in nature. If that is the case, why do we eat matzah beheseba? I understand why we have to eat it b'teavon, but why do we eat it when we're reclining to one side? Clearly, the Jews leaving Mitzrayim did not recline when they ate it. They were on the road. The fact is that if we ate matzah only b'teavon as a primal need, part of what happened that night would be lost. And what is that? It is the fact that for the first time in hundreds of years, Jews, even though on the road with unleavened bread, Jews were eating as free men. Only a free people eat beheseba, and to reenact that part of the story, we eat matzah beheseba. Contrast achilat matzah with achilat maror, which is not eaten beheseba, leaning. Unlike matzah, which at the same time is lechem oni and lechem hagula, it's the poor man's bread, but it's the bread we ate when we were redeemed. Moror is not part of the freedom experience, but is part of the story of servitude in Mitzrayim, and also has to be reenacted and experienced, but not beheseba. The overriding halachic imperative of the evening, as I said, and how Korban Pesach, Afikomen, and Matzah are consumed, are subsumed under the Chayev Adam Liros Es Atzmo Ki Ilu Hu Yatzam in Mitzrayim. We have to put ourselves in that place. It is important to understand that the Seder is not a commemorative dinner and experience, but rather a participatory reenactment of Yetziat Mitzrayim. But what is the Seder's message to us? It teaches us that being a Jew is not a spectator sport. It requires commitment of soul and physical being. It requires immersion in Torah and experiential Yadus. I'll tell you a story that happened to me when I was a much younger man. I was in college, and I got a call from my mother one evening during the week, and I was in YU, and it was Christmas week when everybody who didn't go to a Jewish school was off. And my mother tells me, Barry, I've accepted an invitation for you to appear at a college colloquium on Friday night in the conservative synagogue. They want somebody Orthodox to speak. I said, and who else is speaking there? And she gave me two names. One is known to Jay Solomon because he's from Boston. He was a congressman from Boston. Barney Frank, who grew up in Bayonne, New Jersey. He's a little older than I am, but we knew each other in Bayonne. And I said to him, Mommy, I'm in the midst of finals. I mean, how can I really don't have time to prepare. And this, you got to do it. It's a Kiddush Hashem. I don't know, whatever. So I couldn't say no to my mother, and I go to this thing. And we're sitting there, and it's myself and another fellow by the name of Steve Schlesinger, and there's a moderator, v'chulei. And Barney Frank says the following thing. I want you all to know that I'm very casual about my Judaism. He says, it's not that I'm not aware of. I'm very casual about my Judaism, but it's not the only thing in my life that I'm casual about. I'm casual about my dress, and I'm casual about this. This is another thing that I'm just casual about it. It's not such a big deal to me. I don't take it so seriously. I'm not I don't take my clothing so seriously. And then they asked me to respond. And I looked at him, I said, Barney, I kind of assume that if you were as casual about your dress as you seem to be about your Judaism, you wouldn't look so good. You wouldn't look so well turned out tonight. Judaism requires that you can't be casual. Yiddishkeit requires that you be involved. The Seder requires that you be involved, that you somehow try to have in your mindset that you're leaving Mitzrayim. Nobody's fooling anybody. We're all sitting in Yerushalayim, HaKodesh Baruch Hashem. But on that night, on Motzai Shabbos this year, we have to try to put ourselves in that. We have to try to understand. That's why we do all the things we do. The other story I want to tell you is that there's a man who I know for many years. He's a very nice man. He's a frum Jew, etc. And I met him when I was about to leave and come on Aliyah. And he said to me, Barry, why are you going on Aliyah? A number of people in America asked me that who were frum, and I just didn't understand the question. So I said to him, what do you mean, why am I going on? It's a mitzvah, whatever. So he said, no, you don't understand what I'm saying. He says, I live in New York. He was a European. He says, I live in New York. I get up in the morning and I take in the New York Times. And I see that some tragedy happened somewhere in America. And I read the story and I feel badly. And I get on with my day. Doesn't do anything to my kishkas terribly. I just get on with my day. I know that when I'm in Eretz Yisrael and I pick up the newspaper and I see something terrible has happened, my kishkas churn all day. I don't want to have that. I listened to him. I said, okay. But when you live in Eretz Yisrael, we innately understand that we are not bystanders to Jewish history, but participants in the ongoing saga. The same thing, we are the continuation of what happened when they left Mitzrayim. Our challenge on Seder night is to connect our peoplehood to the peoplehood which initially commenced in Yetziat Mitzrayim, to connect our current epoch in history to that epoch in history. Somehow I have the feeling that this year, as we emerge from and are freed from the COVID pandemic, we may find it easier to relate to Yetziat Mitzrayim, to understand what may Avdut L'Cherut and Yagon L'Simcha mean. This is what Chazal demands from us. It demands that we not be spectators and simple storytellers. Rather, we be participants in the continuum of Jewish history. And may we all be zochet to Geula Shlema and a Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And thank you for your attention.
Shikoach,
Barry.
Shikoach.
I just want to say, anyone who would like to make any comments, feel free to unmute yourselves. I can't help but notice, I think the prize for the most remote listener may go to our friend Rabbi Yossi and his wife.
Yes, absolutely.
I want to extend a special Chag Kasher v'Sameach. I noticed that he posted a note on the chat screen, and which I'm very grateful for. Eric and I want to wish everybody a Chag Kasher and Sameach, and we hope we'll see the Vagos here in Eretz Yisrael very soon.
Amen.
Amen.
To see you as well. It's good to see all of you. It's really very refreshing.
All right.
I want to remind everyone again that tomorrow morning, Shacharis is at 6:20, followed by Siyum is at 7:07. The first Siyum will be broadcast by Zoom. I'm about to post the link in our WhatsApp group, and there will be another Siyum following the 7:07 Shacharit.
Chag Kasher v'Sameach to everyone.
Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Thank you very, very much.